WNST.net. Almost summertime, almost springtime, almost minicamp time, but not nearly football time. But that has not stopped our Luke Jones from being ever present and on the scene for all things rookies. And, I've been on this train for a quarter of a century now, Luke, and I know you're, well a decade into this thing here. There is a little bit of a routine of seeing these young guys come in, and some of them, you see the whites in their eyes get a little larger or smaller. And but in the modern era, they tend to draft more big school guys, but there's a whole amalgamation of undrafted guys with that we're all familiar with Hard Knocks now, right? So this is the beginning of the Hard Knocks of, hey, kid, there's your locker. We don't have any 2 digits left, so we're giving you 3.
Right. And you think back to guys like Dwayne Missouri and Reggie Waddell, and you mentioned Hard Knocks. There you go.
Hold on, where's the quarterback? What was his name? OJ or
was that
Jenkins? Ortiz Jenkins.
Ortiz
Jenkins. Arizona.
Yeah, throwing the worm ball, and then he was cut a day later. But
Lamar gets that video played a million times, right? Like his speech from the stage. I remember the speech with Jenkins. He was leaving his mother's house in Tucson, Arizona, right? Remember, he's like, I'm going to do this. And 3 weeks later, he was home. Like literally, it was like that, right?
Oh, there's no question, and we even saw it this year. I mean, a couple of the rookie free agents the Ravens signed end up being cut after minicamp. I mean, This is the season for back end of the roster moves, and it's always an interesting time for me because there's so much build up for the draft, and then you have rookie camp the following weekend, and then you just have this little bit of a lull for a couple weeks. I mean, Ravens will start OTAs next week, and the first 3 weeks of OTAs they have 1 day open to media each week, so we get a little bit of access, but still not too much. But this is the time of year where the roster is pretty much what it's going to be. Now, they could still add a veteran or two. Of course, the big name that came off the board last week was Ezekiel Ansah. He ends up signing with Seattle after the Ravens have brought him in for a visit. But for the most part...
And by the way, the smoke screens, all the purple smoke coming out of the castle was that he was going to be on the team.
Oh, there were absolutely some expectations, but when you look at what ended up happening with that specifically, signs a 1-year deal, base value of $9 million. That kind of a deal was always going to be problematic for the Ravens because when you look at where they are from a cap standpoint, yes, they could have done that, but then they would have been right up against the cap in terms of space they need for making any other veteran signings. Those off-the-radar type signings that you'd like to maybe add a player or two, add an inside linebacker that can maybe compete with some of these younger guys, what have you. But having a 1-year deal with that high of a base salary for a team that has, before they finish signing their rookie class, right around $14.5 million in cap space, that was going to be problematic. But, they were hopeful. And I think one thing that I'm going to write about this week at WNST.net is where this defense is. I think it's fascinating. We've spent so much time talking about where the offense is and how they're zagging while everyone else is zigging and how they're doing things unconventionally. On the flip side, you look at the defense. You have this secondary that is as good, if not better, than any secondary in the NFL. They've added Earl Thomas, subtracted Eric Weddle. They kept Jimmy Smith, even while guys like me were speculating about his future. And it's not as though they haven't tried to improve their pass rush, but when you lose Terrell Suggs and Zadarius Smith, and to this point all you've netted is Jalen Ferguson, a third-round pick, albeit someone the Ravens are excited about, you're still looking at this from a pass rush standpoint and saying, what are they going to be? I mean, on paper, it looks below average right now in that area specifically. But
well, that's where you would also say, can you scheme it up and put someone in that position? Is there something Wink knows about that you and I don't somehow?
Sure. But here's the interesting concept, and it's going back to what I was just saying about how the offense, the Ravens are doing some things unconventionally. The football analytics community, one of the great debates over the last couple years has been what is more valuable, pass coverage on the back end or your pass rush. Now, conventional wisdom has said, what about football for decades? It all starts up front, right? Well, there's data and there's been research done, and there's a growing sentiment that in today's NFL, with quarterbacks that get rid of the ball as quickly as they do, that if you are going to have one or the other, you obviously want to have both. No one's saying that's not the case. And the Ravens have tried to sign guys like Ziggy Ansah. They were interested in Justin Houston, for example. But if you're going to be in a position where you have a very clear strength, one or the other, more and more sentiment suggests pass coverage is what you want to have because, to what you just said, you can scheme up some pressure. If you cover well on the back end, that's going to help your pass rush, and vice versa. We know that. But the Ravens could very well end up being an interesting case study to really support or debunk the positions of so many of football analytics types who say, if you want to have one or the other in 2019, I'll take the pass coverage over the pass rush. So the Ravens certainly fit that description right now when you're looking at Matt Judon and, let's face it, let's call a spade a spade. Matt Judon and a bunch of question marks that they're trying to, whether it's Tyus Bowser or Tim Williams or Jalen Ferguson as a rookie or Willie Henry coming back from 2018 that was basically wiped away by injury. You have some questions there. There's no doubt. But you look at the secondary and you say, if you're going to have a pass rush that might have some issues, might have some mediocrity, I'm happy to have the coverage that you see on the back end of the defense. So I think the Ravens are a really interesting case study in that regard. And not to say they won't still try to kick the tires. I mean, there are a couple guys out there. Shane Ray comes to mind from Denver, but Shane Ray's essentially another team's Tyus Bowser or Tim Williams, right? I mean, a guy who, he had one decent year in Denver, but he's had injuries and some other issues and just a lack of production. So as it stands now, post-draft, post-rookie free agent period, a post-deadline for the compensatory pick formula, there's not a whole lot out there that's left that's really going to markedly move the meter. So the Ravens defense, as it's constructed, you love the secondary, the pass rush. Well, there's some question marks, but
by the way, I want to say something on that because I sat here and watched 3 days of draft, and you and I didn't go at it. How many times did they call the Ravens defense number one? I mean, I heard it 14 times, and I didn't have the sound up, and I wasn't watching two of them at once. You know what I mean? Like, every time the Ravens would come up, they'd say the Ravens' defense was number one. I keep hearing that, and, you live with that all year. There's only one place to go from there, right?
Yeah, and especially when you look at the names that they lost. I mean, look.
How many years have we been number one in 23? I mean, like, some of those Rex Ryan teams, they were always top five. I got a top five defense. And, Marvin, I don't know that Marvin went around bragging. I don't even remember, was the 2001 team really number one? And I know maybe on points it was, but I don't know about yards allowed and all that stuff. But being number one, I don't know what that means, but I certainly... You feel the weight of it. You really do, right? And I don't know that there's anything that happened this offseason that leads us to believe or leads us to believe that the offense is going to make the defense number one, because I think the offense was as big a part of the defense being number one as anything, right?
Well, I mean, it all worked in concert. I mean, everyone wanted to say, there were some people, Lamar Jackson's detractors said, well, it was all the defense. Lamar Jackson's biggest supporters said, well, the defense played that way because of the style of offense changing. The truth is, it was both. And I'll throw the special teams in there even with the way they played better down the stretch. But, you do look at this team right now, and to your point, they've been number one. I think 2001, they were the number one scoring defense. 2006, they were number one because that was an extraordinary defense that year that, probably closer to the 2000 defense than it gets credit for. But they've had a few number one defenses around here. But when you look at where they stand now with some of the players that they lost, now they added Earl Thomas. We'll see what Jalen Ferguson looks like. But they've lost some significant personnel on the defensive side. So I'd be lying to you if I sat here with confidence saying they're going to be number one again. But to the point I was making about the analytics mindset, they say have the strongest secondary you can possibly have, and that will help other areas of your roster or other areas of your defensive football team. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in that regard. I mean, they need a couple of these young pass rushers to step up. There's no doubt about that. When you look at Tyus Bowser, Tim Williams, and I'll throw Jalen Ferguson in there because he's a rookie. He's a young guy. As much as you like him, he's a third-round pick. He's a young guy. There's no guarantee he's going to come in and beat Terrell Suggs as a rookie or anything crazy like that. But really, when you look at those three, if you can get two of those guys to be contributors for you, and that doesn't mean 12 sacks, but just be guys that can be in the rotation and help you out and make some plays and look like they belong. And whether that means Ferguson gets 6 sacks as a rookie, and I don't know, take your pick between Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams. One of those guys can give them 5 sacks. Then you start to make up the difference a little bit more than what it looks like right now, where you're just saying Matt Judon and a bunch of question marks. So they're going to rely a heck of a lot on that secondary, and they should, by the way. It's a very expensive in terms of cap dollars, in terms of draft capital used on it. That secondary has had a ton of resources pumped into it, so it should be the strength.
Well, you're trying to chase Antonio Brown around so long that he's now gone, and you have to worry about Odell Beckham, right? I mean, and certainly the Bengals have always provided, the A.J. Greens and whoever their tight end happened to be at any given point. That creates nightmares and has created nightmares since Rex Ryan, quite frankly, right?
Sure. And if you look at how the Ravens have operated over the last 5 years, I mean, I think back vividly to 2014, going into that season. If you recall, Nestor, they had Jimmy Smith and Ladarius Webb as their starting corners, and they had the competition between Shockey Brown and Asa Jackson. I like Asa Jackson a lot as a person, but those two guys were competing to be the nickel. They're your number 3 corner. Things have changed a lot over the last 5 years. I mean, you look at...
Well, you wrote for 5 straight years in the offseason that they hadn't done enough. I mean, they drafted a kid that could play who had this incredible tragedy down in Miami, right?
Sure.
I mean, they've had Jimmy Smith with Elise Frank, and they've had all sorts of things happen over the course of time. But more than that, and Eric has spoken to this, I think, out loud. The quickest way to lose is to have the ball go over your head, right? Like, literally, that's how you lose NFL games, is if that happens twice in a game, you're going to lose, right?
Right, and that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the coverage versus pressure. Think about it. If you have an edge rusher who doesn't get to the quarterback, there's still a good chance that play is going to turn out okay for you in the sense that you're not going to lose the ball game. If you have a corner or a safety slip and fall or just bite on a double move, well, that could be the ball game. That's 7 points there so many times. But when you look at how the Ravens have kind of pivoted, and I want to be clear about here, because you and I have talked about this before, and I've drawn the comparisons about how I banged the drum about wide receiver until this year's draft. It's not as though the Ravens didn't prioritize corner, because they had drafted Dwayne Starks back in the day and Chris McAllister the following year. So, I mean, it's not as though that was a position that they completely ignored. But when you look post-drafting Jimmy Smith, when you look at their draft picks at corner in the next 3 years that followed, it was Asa Jackson in the 5th round in 2012, Mark Anthony in the 7th round in 2013. 2014, they didn't even draft a corner. And remember, 14 was the year where they had Rashawn Melvin lining up at corner in the playoffs, and the Patriots throwing the ball over his head over and over.
Well, this is when they're pulling guys off the street from from San Francisco, and giving out contracts, ill-advised contracts later on after that, and flipping around with Matt Elam and anybody they could grab. So yeah, I mean there were. Boy, that would be a luminary, illustrious list there, wouldn't it? I mean, if you went back and just named the 15 guys that got on the field that probably shouldn't have over the last decade, right?
Sure. But since then, since right around 2014, 2015, and remember, 15 they had a slew of injuries up and down the roster, but you look at where they've gone from a draft standpoint. After I mentioned, they had a 3-year period where the only corners they drafted were Asa Jackson and Mark Anthony, 2 late day 3 guys. But since then, 2015, drafted Trey Walker in the 4th round. We know how, the unspeakable tragedy of what happened with him, but 4th-round pick. 2016, drafted Tavon Young, 4th round. Maurice Kennedy, 6th round, and that pick worked out well for a 6th-rounder. 17, they draft Marlon Humphrey, 1st round. Last year, they drafted Anthony Averett, 4th round, another guy who I think could eventually be a starting caliber corner for them. I really like what I've seen from him. And this year they draft Amon Marshall in the 4th round. So what are you seeing there, Nestor? Every single year they're drafting a cornerback in the 4th round or earlier compared to the 3-year period from 12 through 2014 where you're talking about a 5th and a 7th round pick there. They've invested.
You're talking about a special teams player there. You're not talking about a cornerback.
At best, right. So you've seen them up their commitment to drafting corners, and I'm going to use a Mike Elias term here, talking about that talent pipeline. That's what the Ravens have built at the cornerback position over the last few years. Now, to be clear, they've still supplemented that with a Brandon Carr signing. They've certainly spent money at the safety position because they haven't drafted well there in recent years. So it's not as though it's been all about the draft, but we've seen very clearly a commitment to drafting a corner by no later than the 4th round over the last 5 years. I mean, it's just where they've been, and I think you've seen the fruits of that with the depth that they have there. And if you're not going to have a great pass rush, which I'm guessing their pass rush is not going to be great this year. I'm guessing, you're hoping one of Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams, and you're hoping that Jalen Ferguson can do some nice things as a rookie this year. But you don't know if that's going to happen. That's hope more than expectation. So if you're going to have question marks with your pass rush, you sure as heck better be able to cover on the back end, and there's no reason to think the Ravens, with the depth that they've collected, even if there's an injury to a Jimmy Smith, or even if Brandon Carr wakes up and starts looking way older than how he's played, with given what his age has been the last couple years and how he's performed. Even if a couple of those things happen, they still have depth that gives you confidence that that secondary is going to be pretty darn good. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And like I said, the Ravens will be an interesting litmus test with their defense to either validate all these football analytics types who are saying coverage over pressure, or they will kind of dispute them and say, well, the Ravens had this great secondary, but they lost these guys on their pass rush this past offseason, and look what happened to their defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But what you hope in the perfect world is a couple of these young pass rushers pop, and they stay healthy on the secondary. And if they do that, then, well, even with the guys that they lost, maybe we will be talking about a Ravens defense still contending to be number one. Even if that pass rush is an issue, I still think this is pretty comfortably a top 10 caliber defense, and certainly should be in that territory. And they're going to need it to be, considering you do have a very young offense in transition, and even though there's a lot of speed, a lot of potential there, probably going to be some growing pains from time to time. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think, regardless of your expectation level for this Ravens team, and I think most of us see this as a 3-horse race in the AFC North. Pittsburgh, Ravens, Cleveland, whatever order you prefer. Cincinnati, I think, is pretty clearly lagging behind at this point, but it's going to be interesting, and certainly a different Ravens team on both sides of the ball than we've been accustomed to seeing in recent years.
Here's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage, and I have been out and about. If you have been following me out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, been getting out seeing all my sponsors. I was at Patrick's in Essex the other day. Delicious wings. I was a little full when I went in there already, and man, the food was so delicious I had to get after it. Steak dinner on Thursday night, just $11.99. Tacos on Monday, shrimp on Tuesday, wings on Wednesday. Seattle Slew on the back wall, so the race will be on this week as well. Patrick's in Essex and the bands, and they told me that the next time Rob Fahey comes, they're going to have me in to sing some Raised on the Radio. Speaking of music, Model Lyric will be alive with the sounds of music and comedy all summer. Eddie B on June 8th, Bill Maher on June 9th, JoJo Siwa was down at Costas eating the crab Imperial. keeping my tooth lodged in my mouth, eating cream of crab soup as well. And one of my dear friends, Leroy, was there with his daughter, who was a big JoJo Siwa fan. So I had to show them the JoJo Siwa video of me chatting with her at the Mall of America last year at the Super Bowl. So she's in Baltimore June 12th. The Marvin Gaye musical Pride and Joy. It's a whole weekend in June. Go check that out. Diana Ross, June 30th. Johnny Lang, July 11th. And when my wife finds out Ray LaMontagne's going to be playing in October, that will be a night of romance for me right around my birthday in October. There's always magic at the Model Lyric, our great partners there. Make sure you're supporting them. And get back downtown. Everybody, all my downtown partners say, if you're out in the suburbs, that's what Baltimore Positive is about. Get back downtown. Sporticulture, the flowers around my set can be yours just a click away. They also got a lava lamp that I'm trying to get the lava lamp together here. So, Court, if you're listening, I need the lava lamp to get together. They sell them, they stock them, they ship them, and they grow beautiful flowers. One of the biggest weeks of the year out of Walnut Creek Flowers, where Court from Sporticulture runs the joint. They provide all the flowers for the Preakness. So big shout out to Court and our friends out there in the Glen L area. I got to learn my Route 70 West map and all the great Korean places to eat out there. Lee Tessier knows his way around Baltimore. Baltimore's premier realty team and the folks I trust with my real estate transactions. Over 50 years of experience helping local buyers and sellers. Right now, I'm a seller. I'll be a buyer. Locating the finest properties and negotiating the best deals. Learn more, LeeTessier.com. Lee's coming on the program this week as well. Cole Roofing, Bill Cole. I got 2 Bill Coles this week coming on. Sometimes I say, yeah, my friend Bill Cole. They're like, which one? And would that be the Cole Roofing Bill Cole or the Baltimore City Councilman Bill Cole? 2 different Coles. And the UB Bill Cole. So I'm dining and doing radio with both of them. I got to get a Bill Cole City Council mug before it's all over. So if you know either of the Bill Coles, tell them I'm looking for him this week. You'll hear him around here. Cole Roofing, 100 years. We celebrated with the Cole family about 2 weeks ago over at the Maritime Museum. It was fantastic. That's all I can say. Congratulations. My mom's 100th birthday is July 26th. Billy Joel's in town. That'll be the best thing going on at Oriole Park here this summer. But we're on the football. Luke, the offensive side of the ball and where they are with Justin Tucker and, solidifying that part of it. Give me the 50,000-foot view for you, because we've talked so much about the defense here just in this segment. Are you happy with their offseason? Because everywhere I go, I did a huge bull roast with all the Baltimore County restaurants and bars, and Mark from Riverwatch was there, and Johnny D. We had a good time. Jimmy Bell, our friends at High Tops. And everywhere I go around town when I'm out publicly, people they're coming up more than they have in recent years. And they said, do you like the Ravens draft? Like, I'm getting a lot of that when I'm physically out amongst people. Maybe not as much on email or sort of old school, but when people see me, that is the icebreaker. How did you feel about the Ravens offseason? And I would say they signed a Hall of Fame safety, right? They lost a 30, rush edge, who's my least favorite player in the history of the Ravens. I'm famously anti-Terrell Suggs. I think life will go on famously without him. I'm famously pro-Joe Flacco, and I don't really have any argument with what they've done or how they've done it, other than I'm not sold that Lamar Jackson's ever going to be Joe Flacco, and I don't know that they're sold on that either. And we're in this test tube experiment that, to some degree, I give them a lot of credit for doing this sort of, learning how to throw the screwball at this point in their career, right? Like literally doing something different. I don't know that it feels like a Super Bowl formula, but for what they've committed to, I know they have a plan, and they're trying to play checkers while everyone else plays chess to some degree.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd even say it's chess versus checkers. I think it's checkers compared to, chutes and ladders or something like that. I don't know if it's intellectually superior. It's just different.
Sure.
So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. But to the point you just made, I'm fine with their offseason. I can't sit here and say that I think that they're definitely a better football team than they were last year, because they did lose what they lost on defense. Say what you want about Terrell Suggs. He still had 7 sacks last year.
Hell of a football player.
Caliber outside linebacker.
But if he's going to age and be 38 years old, let him go do it out in Arizona if that's where he wants to do it.
And let me be clear about that. I'm not saying that I would have paid more, gone crazy with money to try to keep him. but you still have to replace him. Zadarius Smith, there's no way I would have given what the Green Bay Packers have given him to go to join
it's
the
amazing,
NFC
dude.
North
These teams paying these former Ravens to be impact players when we've witnessed that. There's a real track record here for the Paul Krugers and the Ed Hartwell. I mean, name any of these guys. I'll be honest, I thought Adelis Thomas, when he got his money, he felt more like an impact player. So did Bart Scott within the framework of the defense, that it felt like, oh my God, we're losing really key players in their prime. Yeah. We're going to feel this. I think you're going to feel Suggs and Weddle and Mosley and Zadarius more intellectually than you're going to feel them physically, because I didn't feel like any of them was Ray Lewis or Ed Reed in that way.
Yeah, well, I mean,
or even a Lodi Nada in that way.
You're talking about Hall of Famers there, but I mean, they're going to miss those guys. I think it would be, to me, if you don't think they're going to miss those guys, then you clearly
hold on a second. Let's do the math on this.
Mosley's
annual number is what? 17.5. What did Zadarius? What was his number?
Zadarius Smith had 8.5 sacks last year.
Now, what's his number? His cap number this year for the Green Bay?
In Green Bay? I'd have to look at it.
What's his annual?
It's very high.
We're over $30 million for Mosley and Zadarius. Did they look like $30 million with the impact of this defense last year?
Do any of these guys do when they get big deals? For the most part, I mean, let's face it. I mean, free agency, it has its place, but Nestor, I don't know if this is much commentary on Ravens players leaving as much as it's a commentary on the value of giving players second contracts. Because quite frankly, I think you can look at the second contracts the Ravens have given out over the last 5 years. Now, not going back to Ed Reed or Ray Lewis or Terrell Suggs back in 2008 or 2009 when they gave him his second contract, but I think so much of this is really a commentary on not being sentimental about players once they get to a second contract, because the real value is where? The rookie contract. That's one thing that I look at right now with this team. They've given Tavon Young a second contract. Lots of clamoring for a second contract for Matt Judon and a second contract for Michael Pierce. Maybe Patrick Owasso. Who knows? I mean, I'm just throwing out all the names everyone else has talked about. And my same question with those guys is no different than the question it was for Zadarius Smith, or go back to Kelechi Osemele or Rick Wagner. Go down the list of anyone over the last 3 or 4 years.
Ryan Jensen, just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, look, I like those players, but right now,
do the math on the last 4 years of those players and the money that they got and what it would have taken to keep them, and how the Ravens would have needed a $350 million cap.
Sure. I mean, this is all part of the difficulty of being an NFL general manager. I mean, trying to figure this all out. Look.
Well, and then having everybody tell you suck while all of your players, Torrey Smith, all these guys go and get rich somewhere else. 5 of them a year leave here and go get paid somewhere else every year. And, and all of a sudden Ozzy's the village idiot.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's so much that. I just think it's...
Well, you wonder why you can't count past 10, because you lose your best players.
Well...
so does everybody else, though.
But that's the game here. I mean, it begins and ends with the draft. It really does. But because... and I've heard Eric DeCosta talk about this offseason. I don't think the issue has been that the Ravens have lost all these guys on second contracts. I think the issue is there haven't been enough guys that you've really felt hell-bent on needing to give a second contract to. I think that's been more my issue. All these guys that have departed, including the guys that they've lost this year,
I love Mosley, but if he is Ray Lewis, he's still here. He was never Ray Lewis, so he's not.
They signed C.J. Mosley a year ago.
And somebody else paid him like he was Ray Lewis. You think they're going to miss him the most?
Of the players that I think Zadarius Smith, because of what he brought from a versatility standpoint, being someone who could slide inside in a way similar to Pernell McPhee. We always compared those guys, and that comparison ended up being pretty accurate. And I'm guessing production-wise will end up being similar. I'm not expecting him to do big things beyond maybe the next year or so in Green Bay, but we'll see. But my point is, I think him, and certainly they're going to miss Mosley. I mean, he was a good player. To say he's not Ray Lewis isn't validation for saying that you're not going to miss him. I mean, there are lots of good players that weren't Ray Lewis. So.
But there's also a point to saying I'm not giving that guy $17 million like someone else did.
Believe me, Nestor, I agree with not giving him $17 million, but you still have to replace the player. And, we've talked about this over and over and over in terms of there's a difference between being fiscally responsible with the cap and making difficult decisions and replacing that player's production on the field. Now, the Ravens have done it in some instances. They've replaced players, and they've had someone step in and do as good, if not a better job for, it's the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the production for 20% of the cost, and sometimes it's even better than that. But there have been times where they've lost guys, and they don't replace them, and it becomes more of a headache. And, to sit here and say that the Ravens aren't going to have any drop-off at all when C.J. Mosley leaves, well, you mugh not have thought much about the defense the last 4 or 5 years because he was a big part of that. Same with Zadarius Smith last year. Same with even late career Terrell Suggs moving on. And even Eric Weddle, for the limitations he might have had physically, the football intellect that he gave is highly respected around the league. It's one reason why the Rams, they scooped him up really quickly. They wanted his football mind in the back of their defense. So you're going to miss these guys. It doesn't mean that they're not replaceable. It doesn't mean that the Ravens' defense can't still play at a very high level, but it is going to be different, and there are challenges. But going back to this issue of re-signing guys, giving guys a second contract, it's actually funny, Nestor. I did Dennis Kalatzis' show about a week and a half ago or so, and one of the things we talked about was the value of whether to give players a second contract and how I feel that should be a really select group of players. I mean, you shouldn't be giving out a ton of second.
That's not for the ordinary guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's where, as much as the Ravens have the cap flexibility now in the post-Joe Flacco era, and will have even more so next year when there's no dead money and they're completely, the Joe Flacco contract is completely wiped away from the books and for accounting purposes. But my point is, just because you can doesn't mean you necessarily should give out second contracts to some of these guys. And, even this offseason, look, I like Nick Boyle a lot. I think he's a good player. Do I think the Ravens overpaid to keep him? Yeah, I think they did. Now, we'll see how that plays out, and we'll see. They're going to run the ball a lot, so I understand he has more value to the Ravens.
Well, for what they gave him, if they get extreme value out of him this year, it's a good signing, right?
I mean, fine. I'm not saying it's a terrible signing, but it was an overpay. I mean, look at how much he makes compared to any other blocking tight end in the NFL. They overpaid.
Sure.
And that's fine. I mean, if you're going to overpay for something, if he's that important to your running game, and I've said over the last year or two, he's been a linchpin for their running game, by all means, do what it takes to keep him. But it's still, from a value standpoint, not sure that it was a great contract in that way. Tavon Young, there's still a lot of projecting going on there in terms of what they gave him. I mean, they made him, at the time of it, the highest paid slot corner in the NFL. Has he been the best slot corner in the NFL? I think it's way too soon to know if he's going to be that kind of player. I think he's a good player, but again, not necessarily getting great value unless we see Tavon Young hit another level, and he might be a guy that gets some consideration as the best slot corner in the NFL. So my point isn't to belittle those signings. My point is to just think about it critically in terms of just because you can sign guys to second contracts now and have a little more cap flexibility over the next few years with a quarterback on a rookie contract doesn't just mean you should just start giving out second contracts without thinking twice, because just because you think Zadarius Smith is not going to work out in Green Bay, that doesn't mean that giving Matt Judon a second contract in Baltimore is going to work out swimmingly. It could be the same potential scenario, only he stays.
Well, there's a lot of guys with a lot of opportunity to earn here, right? Like
no
that's
doubt.
just where it's at. Luke, we got to wrap here. I want to give a shout out to everybody at Compass Point. I'm hoping the weather gets better for Robert Kennedy. Big major week. We're going to be talking some golf around here as well. Obviously, a big Preakness week around here. If you hear Clem Florio, if you hear Joe DeFrancis, if you hear Charlie Ekman, if you hear some old school conversation with Gary Stevens or Bob Baffert, it's real. Also going to be having all of the current guests on as we get ready for Preakness this week. King Discount Liquors gave the King a ring. I remember we would bring the wheelbarrow over there on Preakness weekend. Lottery Beer Booze, the best prices in Baltimore. See Johnny Bev for all your beer, wine, and liquor needs. Little black-eyed Susan would be dandy here. King Discount Liquors in Rosedale. Fremont Mortgage, don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. I was with Carl Delmont the other day up at Silver Spring Mining Company, one of our new great sponsors as well. I'm going to watch some hockey up there before the week's over as well. Fremont Mortgage, 30 years. It's a long time. You don't want to be snookered into a bad mortgage. I mean, it's the biggest investment you're going to make. Make sure you're thinking about it with the right folks. Get some education up at FriedmontMortgage.com. Also, our friends in Essex. Got a lot of friends in Essex. I mentioned Patrick's earlier. Pizza John's, my mom's favorite pizza, Mother's Day. I'm going for the cheesesteaks. Dutch Rupert's Burgers up in Baltimore, positive as well. We ate a lot of pizza that day. There's a lot of aggression and cheeseburgers and pizza and all that good stuff. Pizza John's, delicious. I even had a Peroni beer as well to go with my pizza. I had pepperoni, just straight pepperoni for the first time in a long time. It was delicious, crispy. Al Seafood in Essex provided some shrimp for me last week and some shrimp cocktail and some crab balls and some salad. And they can do the same for you. All my salads had potato salad, coleslaw, macaroni salad. They sent some desserts. Al Seafood in Essex. They've been doing it since the 1970s. And I've seen the crabs. Chad said the crabs are like unbelievable right now. I also saw them at Costas this week. They're as big as my head. Get out, eat some crabs. It's May. It's fantastic. It's been gloomy outside. It's lovely to bring some crabs in and watch some last place baseball with Luke and I. You can find Luke at WNST.net. Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. I am Nasty at WNST.net. Our morning newspaper delivers digitally each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. $5 down, $10 a month. It's the Planet Fitness way. And a big shout out to the Brick family celebrating additions and having some fun. It's always fun to follow our friends and our sponsors out in social media as well. So big love to the Brick family and all of our friends at Planet Fitness. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and doing business and doing LinkedIn and doing Baltimore Positive with Barbara Mikulski this week. We're going to be at State Fair with Damian O'Doherty this Thursday. We have Freeman Rabowski 2 weeks from Thursday. That's on the 30th at State Fair in Catonsville. We're going to be talking about the dogs of UMBC and higher education and getting better elected officials to run our city. Baltimore Positive. Please go check it out. And my dear friend Don Moeller, that's Thursday at State Fair in Catonsville. I'll be the one having the Chesapeake Benedict if I don't get the chicken and waffles first. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.